So this was something that was passed down through the family, learning the skill and art
of purchasing your saloon.
Welcome to WatchMojoUK, and today we're looking at the most harrowing revelations on Who Do You Think You Are?
Sorry. No, take your time.
Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
The family villain.
He's in a turret, chucking stones at them.
Something like that.
Pretty much.
Yes.
It won't come as a surprise that Jack Whitehall's family has been privileged going back generations, but even he and his father were shocked to learn what their ancestor, Thomas Jones Phillips, had been up to.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
It is.
Our ancestor, Thomas Jones Phillips.
He's the dodgy emissary that's come to the meeting in like a bad disguise.
It turned out that Phillips was a lawyer who had helped build the case against Henry Vincent, a prominent Chartist, and was one of many to oppose Chartism in the early 19th century. Chartism was a movement demanding more rights for the working class.
They're forming mobs and they're heading down towards Newport. And our ancestor is trailing them in his first-class coach, monitoring them at every point.
Later they found out that another ancestor was committed to an asylum by the family, almost definitely because she was suffering from what we now know to be syphilis.
This affected a great many patients at this time, and it refers to a condition that's a result of late-stage syphilis. So this is when the disease infects the brain.
This was probably given to her by her travelling salesman husband. Murder most foul.
And on the very instant that they appeared, they were knocked down and received many desperate stabs.
In this episode, Emma Willis travelled to Ireland to learn about her Irish roots. When she went to Dunlavin, she learned firsthand about sectarianism in Ireland when one of her ancestors, Richard Fowler, a member of the Orange Order, was accused of murder.
On their arrival at the guardhouse, they were again stabbed with bayonets.
The historian explains where the accusation came from, showing a different newspaper that reported on how Fowler and some other men attacked another man, Michael Egan, and his son for supporting a united Ireland.
They did survive, so they weren't killed on that night.
The entire incident sounded very violent and was upsetting for Willis to learn about. When the case went to court, Fowler was charged for the crime, imprisoned.
Oh my gosh, look at that! But being an evil, disposed person, evil.
When Amanda Holden found out that one of her great-grandfathers was sent to prison in the early 19th century, she immediately wanted to learn why. She soon found out that when he was only 10, he'd gotten an extremely strict apprenticeship and joined the workforce.
So this is 1800. So he's 10.
He's only 10 when he's going into this.
That's the same age as Lexi, my daughter.
Later, he tried to join the Royal Marines, aged just 15, but his apprenticeship master claimed him back. Still a teenager, he was found to have stolen a large sum of money and sent down. But this money was actually his soldier's wage that he wasn't legally entitled to because he was an apprentice.
Charged with unlawfully having knowingly,
By false
pretenses, obtained the sum of £11.
Holden visited the part of the prison where the cells used to be, hundreds of years ago.
The cells where Colin was held as he awaited trial were still in use until 2003, when the Crown Court moved.
Dracula.
You'll see a few headstones.
Yeah, familiar names.
Which are familiar names.
Mullen. Kane.
Mark Gatiss travelled to Northern Ireland and made an astonishing discovery. He met with a folklorist in a small village to talk about how myths and stories would have shaped the lives of his ancestors. And it's not long before Gatiss's love of vampires is brought up. Remember, he once played a vampire in Being Human and co-developed Dracula with longtime collaborator Stephen Moffat.
So this vampire story concerns an O'Kane.
It does, yeah.
It would have been a story known to my great-great-great-grandfather Mullen.
He was given a book of traditional folk tales that would have originally been delivered orally, including one concerning a vampire-slaying O'Kane, which is one of Gatiss's ancestral names. He and his ancestors, going back generations, shared this love of the supernatural.
Somehow there's a little slant towards all that which comes from being of this stock way back. I'd like to think so.
Family tragedy. In this older episode, Fiona Bruce was investigating and wanted to learn what had happened to her great-great-great-grandfather, George.
There's a George Bruce, a fisherman. Pauper. Formerly a fisherman.
Soon enough, she unearthed the tragic circumstances around his death when they found records that showed he died of malnutrition in the poorhouse.
I can't really understand how that happened because there he was in Hopeman, it's a little village.
It's harrowing to learn just how common this was, as he likely had food to eat, but in such small amounts and of such little nutritional value that he tragically passed away regardless.
Or what? Why did he die in such a just sort of desperate and lonely way?
Looking into it further, Bruce discovered that George was, according to other records, a drunk, and his family were either unable or unwilling to help him.
So they wanted his son to rather than them having to pay the poor relief, they wanted the sons to pay. And the son is saying that he can't pay.
Accused of arson. In her episode, Sheridan Smith found a familial tradition of playing the banjo, but also something more sinister about her musical great-great-grandfather, Benjamin Doubleday, who eventually became a publican.
Shortly before 4 o'clock this morning, a fire broke out on the premises of Mr. Doubleday, Woodman Inn, Sheffield Moor.
He owned the Woodman Inn, which was mysteriously noted to have suffered 2 serious fires during his lifetime. She began to put 2 and 2 together when a Victorian newspaper article said that, before the second fire, all of Doubleday's possessions were removed from the property.
There's scarcely any furniture in any of the rooms. Doubleday was the only person on the premises. He was leaving the house this week, having removed most of his belongings.
Upon learning that Doubleday was charged with arson and fraud and was left by his wife, who'd taken the furniture and the kids, she broke down in tears.
It is, and he taught himself to bring up his kids and everything he's done for his family, that this now just seems like a different person.
Yeah.
He was thankfully found not guilty, however. Tragedies in Upton Park.
Past that he was afraid he should lose his senses, so he clearly was kind of worried about his mental health, and he was really disappointed at the result of his father's will, and I think that's kind of the thing that sent him over the edge.
Davina McCall was on the show to find out whether there was any proof to a long-standing family claim that they related, illegitimately, to George IV. She wanted details on her great-grandfather ×4, James Thomas Bedborough, or JT, but instead found out some chilling information about his son, George. George tragically took his own life in Upton Park in 1865.
So Upton Park caused someone's death. That's really sad.
Davina discovered that George's motivation for this may have been disputes over his father, JT's, inheritance with other members of the family.
Mr. Joseph Radnor, pawnbroker, said, "I have seen the body of the deceased and I identify it as Mr. John Bedborough."
Sadder still, George's brother John also took his own life, with the family owing debts that JT had incurred to build lavish estates in Upton Park. Mysterious deaths.
The general rule is that wherever you see a big gap in a family, you have to think that it might be syphilis.
Martin Freeman wanted to find out why, specifically, so many children in his family tree seemed to die young.
Most people who had syphilis didn't realise it and passed it on unknowingly.
The first thing he was told by an expert in sexual health was that the most likely cause of so many deaths was syphilis, once again, this time being transmitted between mother and children.
And then you've lost 1, 2, 3, 4 that you know about. Yes. And possibly 2 other children, all of them early deaths.
This one was a real lesson in the history of medicine and pathology, as Martin learned that after a number of years, eventually mothers who have contracted syphilis can begin to give birth to healthy children. It's devastating to see the impact this disease had on only one family, though.
At the time that this family were around, 100 years ago, about 1 in 10 people in Britain had syphilis.
Execution. Boy George went to Dublin to visit Mountjoy Jail, the site of the execution of one of his ancestors, Thomas Bryan.
The execution would have taken as little as 13 seconds for the 2 individuals.
Bryan was one of the Forgotten 10, a group of IRA members. Bryan and 5 others were hanged in Mountjoy in 1921, and they were buried in unmarked graves.
My overall feeling is of anger. It's just awful. It's like macabre theatre.
It took 80 years of campaigning to get them exhumed and then reburied properly when they were given state funerals in Ireland.
I'm proud and I'm sad. I think that's the best way to describe how I feel.
Boy George found it understandably upsetting to see the gallows where the men, including his great-uncle, were hanged, and he refused the offer to use the lever that sent men to their deaths himself.
He would send that forward. That is possibly the last sound the individuals would have heard.
Slavery.
He owned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 slaves.
I can see that.
Upon starting his genealogy journey, celebrity chef Ainsley Harriott believed that his family was descended from black slaves in Jamaica when it was still a British colony, but he soon found out that his ancestors far enough back were white.
He actually purchased these slaves from his father. So his father gave him 10 shillings and then took back the 10 shillings and gave him slaves.
Not just that, but there was a record of his great-great-grandfather James Gordon Harriot's property, i.e. the slaves he owned, back in 1825, before slavery was abolished in the British Empire.
It's ridiculous. I mean, it's a 4-year-old child. What does a 4-year-old child know?
The slave owning went back generations, with detailed records available for that side of the family. We can't imagine how it feels to have come to terms with this, and it was truly devastating for Ainsley.
One moment you're feeling this almost hatred for people who dominated and controlled.
Let us know in the comments any interesting stories from your family history.
Because it's hard after reading this to think he was a good man.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojoUK and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.